So just really quick howdy do. I'm Cindy Hale of Clover Valley Farms. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm also the producer, education, and infrastructure coordinator for, say that fast 10 times, for the Finland Food Chain Project, who is sponsoring this workshop. And we're really excited to be able to, our intention, of course, this year was to do lots of face-to-face in-person workshops. So we're pivoting now and doing more on Zoom. So hopefully this all works for everybody. There's also other staff affiliated with the Finland Food Chain on this call that'll pop in and out during the questions. David Abaz, who's with the Northeast Regional Sustainable Development Partnership. That's another one you can say fast 10 times. Honor Schauland, who is the director of the Friends of Finland Community Center in Finland and head honcho here on the Finland Food Chain project. Corey Melby, who is our IT website, all things technological guy, and Federica Ranelli, who is our education outreach coordinator. So they'll be popping in periodically. So it is 10:04, and we're up to 41. So Honor, if you just want to monitor people as they come in, I am going to share my screen, and we're just going to start this presentation here. Okay. I think I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay. So, Honor, I'm hearing some running water or something. If you could just mute everybody, that would be awesome. Okay. Yeah. So Honor, I'm only seeing my slideshow. So if something goes amiss, let me know, okay?
It looks good from our end. Okay,
so we're launching here. The Finland Food Chain Minnesota Cottage Food Zoominar, woohoo! What to expect. I'm gonna go through a 15 to 20 minute introduction to the laws of the Minnesota Cottage Food Law, and then answer your questions. I have tons of visual aids around me, so when we get to that point, hopefully that will be helpful. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and then after the slideshow, we'll be answering those questions. And if you haven't already, please mute your microphone. We are recording this presentation, and it'll be posted at the finlandfoodchain.org website. So it's going to go pretty fast. So don't worry about taking notes, because this will be posted, all the links and all the information. Okay. So cottage food and COVID, got to cover this right up front. You are, as cottage food producers, considered essential. And so you are, yeah, you should consider yourself essential. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture has kind of a landing place on the Cottage Food Law guidance page that will give you updates on the status of COVID. It's a moving target, but right now, basically as of now, you still can sell directly and deliver directly to customers just like you always have. Okay. A quick introduction to Minnesota Cottage Food Law. This is what the presentation is going to include. I'm going to show you resources where you should be getting your information. Talk about the two-tier system, registration, training, the amount of income, and the requirements for producing cottage food. What the heck is non-potentially hazardous food? How do you know what you can and can't do through cottage food? Labeling requirements, so labeling of your product. Signage requirements where you're selling the products, measuring pH, why, when, how, and then resources, and then we're going to launch into the questions. And we're going to, like I said, these slides are going to move quick, but don't worry. So the resources, these are the places you need to go for good, up-to-date information. The Minnesota Department of Ag Cottage Food Law Guidance website has the registration forms and links to all the trainings, and also lots of questions what that people have related to cottage food are answered on that website. The University of Minnesota Extension provides the cottage food training for the Tier 2 cottage food producers. You'll know what that is in a minute. And then a really fabulous place to go, if you haven't already discovered it, is the Minnesota Farm Market Association. They have this fact sheet. It's an 11-page wonderfulness of all the details of what you can and can't do, with lots of links. So it's an excellent resource. And there's also a Minnesota Cottage Food Facebook group. So those are the places you should be getting your information. I'm just so just so you know, I'm not on that list, but I'm kind of a in between. So I'm trying to get this information to you guys. So first and most important thing is understanding that as a cottage food vendor, you register as an individual. So for example, I own the business Clover Valley Farms. Clover Valley Farms cannot be a cottage food vendor. Cindy Hale can be. My daughter May Hall can be. My husband Jeff Hall can be. But my business is not. So the cottage food registration is linked to an individual. Registration's required. Training is required online or in person. The training is good for 3 years. So you do it once, you're good for 3 years. Tier 1. So Tier 1 is used for new registrants. So if you've never registered as a cottage food vendor, even if you plan on making $18,000 this year selling cottage food, you still register as Tier 1. If you're a new registrant, you register as Tier 1. If you have registered before and are re-registering and you plan to sell up to, but not over, $5,000 in gross sales each year, then you register as Tier 1. There is no registration fee for Tier 1. Tier 2 gives you more opportunities. Each individual can earn up to $18,000 in gross sales. There is a $50 registration fee, which is a deal if you're making $18,000, and that link can bring you to more information on that. And I'm gonna show you a walkthrough on how to do. Okay, there we go. So first of all, cottage foods, it is exempt from licensing, but requires registration. So it's important to kind of know that those are different things. So licensing is not the same as registration. Registration is a much lower bar than licensing. And I'm going to show you screenshots later on how to register, because there are some parts where it is a little bit confusing. All right, cottage food allows non-potentially hazardous food. Some examples are baked goods, flavored honey, maple syrup, pickles, salsa, fermented products, jams, jellies, fruit syrups. Again, you're gonna hear me say this lots of times, that this Minnesota Farm Market Association is a great place to go to download this really excellent list of what is and is not allowed as a cottage food. And then importantly, just got to reiterate, so cottage food registration allows you to sell non-potentially hazardous foods that you make in your own kitchen to the end consumer. So you cannot sell your cottage food product to the school or a food business or a restaurant. If you are selling to anybody but the end user, the person or the family that's going to consume your product, then you fall under a different regulation. You're a food business, and you're going to need an inspected space. So just know that as a cottage food vendor, you are making it yourself, selling it, and delivering it to the end consumer. That's really important. All right. Again, you're going to get sick of seeing this, but the Minnesota Farm Market Association, great place to look. And this comes up all the time, so I'm just going to throw it out there. Under no circumstances are you allowed to sell dairy, eggs, fish, meat, poultry, or seafood under the cottage food law. Yes, you can use dairy and eggs in your baked goods, but you can't sell, milk or cheese or fish under the cottage food. People can sell shelled eggs directly, That's another registration that we're not going to cover here, but it's not covered under cottage food. So if you want to sell eggs at the farmer's market, you need another registration, and we can talk about that in the Q&A if you like to, but that is not covered under cottage food. All right, so trainings for cottage food. So there's the Tier 1 training, which is free and online. Again, for new vendors who are registering for the first time or those who sell less than $5,000 annually. And that's on the Minnesota Department of Ag Food Law Guidance website. And the Tier 2 producers get their online training through the University of Minnesota Extension. And again, more specifics are coming on that in the next, I just want to go through it real quick. Okay, cottage food labeling. So what do you got to put on the product that you're making and selling under the cottage food law? So obviously the name of the item, you know, chocolate chip cookie or whatever. You need to list the name and address, including the city, state, and zip code of the individual making the food. Remember, individuals only cottage food. I can't put Clover Valley Farms on that label of my cottage food because Clover Valley Farms is not a cottage food producer. Cindy Hale is. You can use a P.O. box as long as it's linked to the individual who holds the cottage food registration. You also need to list the date that the food was made, day, month, year, list of ingredients in the product from greatest to least in volume or weight, and include any allergens. The allergens that are of concern that you need to think about are milk, eggs, soy, peanuts, tree nuts, which now includes coconut, fish and shellfish. And there's a link so you can get more information on the labeling requirements. And I'm just gonna walk through real quick. Okay, that's the title. Here's a great example of a label. That's the name of the item. Here's the name and address of Betty Homemaker. The date the food was made. List of ingredients and allergens. So whether you think allergies are legit or not, doesn't matter. If it's got wheat in it, you got to put contains wheat. If it's got eggs in it, you got to put contains wheat, yada, yada. So there you go. So as of right now, you are not required to put the weight or volume, and you are no longer required to put this product was made in a private home, not subject to state licensing or inspection on the label. Doesn't hurt to do that. I would advise doing that, but you're not required to do that. Okay? All right. Now you've got your product. It's got a perfect label on it. Everything's great. Now you're going to go sell it at the farmer's market or some kind of community event. You are required to have certain kinds of signage. You will have, when you register for, okay, I'm going to stop share here just for a second. Hi, can people see me? Yes or no? Somebody tell me whether or not you can see me.
My
Hello?
video.
We can see ya.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So this is what you get when you register as a cottage food. On the back, it has your registration. It looks really official. That's your registration. And this is the placard. So even though you're not required to post this, you are required to have it on site when you're selling cottage food. So why not display it proudly, right? The other two pieces of signage that you must have are something to the effect of, well, no, this is the exact verbiage you need to use. You can't be like, well, these are kind of made in home in my kitchen, but they're great anyway. No, this is the verbiage you must use. These foods are homemade and not subject to state inspection. And then you see the purple sign, these projects are homemade. That's a good example of a sign required for non-potentially hazardous foods, like baked goods. And then for things that are canned products, these canned goods are homemade, not subject. And you can download these at the, again, Minnesota Cottage Food Guidance. You can download these. I laminated them, and you These are required to be posted at the point of sale. All right. Okay, so, and just really quickly, again, to drive home the difference between cottage food sales and licensed food sales. In cottage food, you can make it at home in your kitchen. A licensed food must be made in an approved commercial kitchen, not a private residence. Under cottage food, you can sell non-potentially hazardous food. If you want to sell something that doesn't fall under that, then you can get an inspection and facility to do that. So you can sell, potentially hazardous foods as long as you're doing it in a licensed and inspected facility. Cottage food, there's an ultimate cap of $18,000 a year per individual. Licensed food sales, there's no sales cap. The licensed food is also, you can sell that through your business name, so Clover Valley Farms. Remember, cottage food is individuals only. And here's something that's really important. Cottage food vendors cannot ship their product. So you can sell it online and people can pay for it online, but you have to deliver it in person, meaning you deliver it to their house or they come pick it up at the farm market and you physically hand it to them. You cannot ship it. I know that's going to twist somebody's head into a bundle, but that is the rule right now. So this is a requirements at a glance. This is, again, a part of the Minnesota Farm Market fact sheet, which is really nice. It just really clearly states these are the things you must do, things you should do, things you may do, things you cannot do. So again, those resources are really important to have on hand. All right, so if anybody's tried, is actually registered already or has tried to register and said, what, this is weird, I don't understand, it's so confusing, you're not alone. So that's why I'm going to give you this step by step. So to register for cottage food, you go to the Minnesota Department of Ag Cottage Food Law guidance site, and on the upper right hand under forms and resources, there's a cottage food producer registration form. This is the registration form that you will use for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 registrations. You just check the appropriate box. So that's the form for all the registrations. This is what gets really confusing. So the PDF, there's a PDF under that, Training for Cottage Food Producer Registration PDF. That is the free online training for Tier 1 vendors. So if you've never been a cottage food vendor before, that's your training. If you are a Tier 1 and you need to renew your training, that's your training. It's a PDF that has a really nice, it walks you through the food safety things that you're required to do. And then at the end, it has questions and it gives you the answers. Okay? So that's your training for the Tier 1. There is no formal sign off from somebody that says, I hereby declare that Cindy Hale has attended and completed successfully the Tier 1 online training. By signing the registration form for Tier 1, you attest to the fact that you have completed the training. So there you have it. So yes, you could cheat and not do it. Highly not recommended, because there is really good, important information in that PDF you need to understand so you don't get crossed off, get into dangerous zones with your cottage food law. So it's not that long, it's not that heinous. Just do the online training, be a good person, and there you have it. So for the Tier 2 producers, so say you've been a Tier 1 producer and this year you're going to bump it up, baby. You're going to sell $12,000, $15,000. So now you need to do the $50 online training. That's it. You log in, you pay your $50, you do the online training. It takes about 3 to 4 hours. And it's an excellent training. So that's what you do to qualify for a Tier 2. And at the end of that, you will get some kind of verification that you've completed that. All right, so just to remember, we are recording this presentation. I know I'm going really fast, and so some people might be freaking out. Don't worry, we're recording it, and it's going to be posted at the Finland Food Chain website. So now on to what kinds of things are and are not allowed as a cottage food. So cottage food must be non-potentially hazardous. There are two ways to meet that criteria. The first is having an equilibrium pH of 4.6 or lower, and to be heat treated to kill vegetative cells. So if you're making pickles, your pickles have to have an equilibrium pH of 4.6 or lower and be heat treated. So you can't just put the pickles in a jar, refrigerator pickles that aren't heat treated, not legal, not okay, because you haven't killed the vegetative cells. Obviously, it's hard to take pH for something like bread. So for things that don't have are hard to measure a pH, or pH isn't relevant, the measure is water activity. So that's jams and jellies, breads, dehydrated herbs, things like that. It has to have a water activity value of 0.85 or lower. That is not the same as percent water. And I'll talk to you more about this in a little bit further into the presentation. So, and then it also has to be heat treated to kill vegetation, and it has to be a kind of product that does not require refrigeration. So for example, cheesecake, not allowed. Because even though it might have a water activity value, maybe you can make a cheesecake that has a low enough water activity value and it's heated, but it requires refrigeration afterwards. So you cannot sell that. So you meet, for any given product, you meet one or other of these criteria. I hope that's kind of clear. All right, so food must have an equilibrium pH of 4.6 or lower and be heat treated. So an equilibrium pH, what the heck is that? So an equilibrium pH means it's a pH at least 24 hours after the processing has occurred. So if you take a pH, and people who make salsas, you probably know this, the pH of the product before you can it might be different than the product pH after it's been canned and then sits for a little while. If you have a particularly chunky product like dilly beans, you need to blend and homogenize that product so we get the equilibrium pH of the whole product, not just the brine. And a great example of that was somebody who was selling hard-boiled eggs, pickled hard-boiled eggs. And, you know, a month after they had pickled those eggs, if you chop that egg open and tried to get a pH of that yolk, it was still not acidic enough. So it's really important that the equilibrium pH include all of the components, not just the brine. It has to be a puree of all of the products that are in that canned product that you're selling. If you're doing something like vinegar and kombucha, which are legal with some caveats, then you need to test the product at the end of the fermentation process. Same for kimchi, anything like that. So you need to have that pH tested at the end of the fermentation process. Okay. You also need to record all of this. So you need to record the pH of each product along with the recipe source, date, and quantity made in each batch. And because the University of Minnesota and everybody are so nice, they've produced a perfect little data sheet. It's literally a half sheet where you can download this sheet and use this to make the records every time you do a batch of your cottage food product. You just have to have that on hand so that if ever there is a food safety issue, you have records of what was produced when and under what conditions. So there you go. Okay, so measuring pH. You cannot use pH test strips. I know that's a bummer for a lot of people, but having used pH test strips a lot, I can attest to the accuracy of this statement. They're not very accurate, especially for things that are above 3 pH. Like things, canned goods are often above 3, you know, they're down 4, 4.2. Those test strips are not accurate enough to give you a reliable measure of pH, and they don't work if there's color in the food. So how many things do you make that have no color in them? Well, that's why you can't use pH test strips, because the result can be biased or off craziness if the food has color. So you can't use pH test strips. So what does that mean? So you actually have to test the pH of your food using a pH meter and calibration solutions. It's not as hard as it sounds. If your brain just exploded when I said calibration solutions, worry not. It's not that difficult. And if there is enough interest, we are more than willing to do a Zoominar on pH meters, choosing them, using them, calibrating them, storing them. It's not crazy rocket science, but you do need to, you know what you're doing. And we'll field questions on this later too. Okay, so just up front on pH meters, there are lots of brands that look like that. They're yellow and they have those 2 little buttons. Some of them are blue. I've even seen a silver one. If you go to Amazon, the vast majority of the cheap pH meters, they might have a different brand name on them. They might be yellow, but it might be blue, but they're exactly the same meter and they're crap. Don't waste your $12 to $15. They're not waterproof. They fail easily. The calibrations don't hold. So don't bother, okay? It's worth spending $45 to $50, $70 for a good pocket pH meter. And we'll give you some examples of those. So here are a few that Apera is a good brand. What was it? Dr. Meter is another good brand. So what you're looking for in a pH meter is that the measurement resolution has 0.01 increments. So it will report pH, for example, as 4.12 or 3.98. So you get a really high level of resolution and precision in your pH measurement. You do not need a pH meter that also gets TDS, total dissolved solid, or conductivity measures. There's a lot of meters out there that, you know, they're like, oh, we're awesome because you can get pH and TDS and conductivity. You don't need that. If your meter has it, that's fine, but you don't need it. You need a pH meter, okay? Definitely get something waterproof because otherwise water will get into the meter and it'll fail, and that stinks. Most meters come with a set of stock calibration stock solutions. Those are these things in this little envelope, the blue, green, and red little envelopes next to that meter up on the top. They're powders that come in a packet. You dissolve them in distilled water, and voila, you have your calibration stock solutions. And we can go over more of that later here during the Q&A if you'd like to. You may need to buy storage solution. That's what this little blue bottle is down here, the H2O sink. It's a particular kind of solution that allows you to store your meter so it doesn't lose its viability. And I just gotta say, because you just gotta say, be sure to calibrate, use, and store your pH meter as directed by the manufacturer. Each manufacturer and each pen or pH meter is a little different, so make sure you follow the manufacturer's directions on all that. Okay, so you're making bread, so you're not going to measure pH. Now you care about water activity. Okay, so what the heck is water activity? It reflects the amount of free water in food. The measure of water activity indicates the shelf stability of the food and the potential for microbial reproduction. So, for example, a jam or a jelly has low water activity because the water's bound up in the sugar. A dehydrated herb has low water activity because there isn't any water in it. So different products, breads, so a bread has to be low enough water activity so that it is shelf stable and minimizes the potential for microbial reproduction. For most things like sourdough breads, a crusty, really nice chewy bread, you're going to be in that 0.0 or 0.85 water activity or less. Where you start to get really dicey on water activity is things like banana bread or fruit breads that quick breads that tend to be much more moist. They are usually not under the correct water activity. So there's 3 different ways that you can ensure that you are under the correct level of water activity for your cottage food product. The first and easiest is to use and follow an approved recipe. There are, and we'll give you links later on here, there are a whole series of sources that you can find approved recipes. And as long as you follow those approved recipes, so you get an approved recipe for bread and you don't add something extra to it, like, oh, I'm gonna throw raisins in this bread, all of a sudden you've changed that recipe, it's no longer approved. So use and follow an approved recipe. Now, if you have Grandma Hale's banana bread recipe, and it is the best banana bread in the known universe, and that's the recipe you want to use, you can have your recipe tested at a lab. It's not that expensive if you really, really want to use your recipe. The other, much more difficult, is to actually measure the water activity yourself. Okay, so we are officially at the question and answer stage. So I'm gonna unshare. I know that went really fast, folks. So because I was doing that, I haven't seen the chat questions. I had 3 questions that people sent to me early on. If you would like me to, I could just launch through those and then come back for the live Q&A.
Cindy,
yes.
Since you were just talking about meters and measuring pH, there's a question from Greg in the chat about if the meters can be used for solids or only liquids.
The meters, so if you have a more solid product like a jam or a jelly and you're not going to use water activity, you're going to use pH. So what you can do is take something that's more solid and puree it in distilled water. Because distilled water, remember, is 0 in the pH scale. That means it doesn't have it doesn't have any pluses or minuses. So you can dilute your product in distilled water and get an accurate measurement of its pH. So excellent question. Yes. So if you have a solid product, that's what you would do.
So that was a soil question. So you can do the same with soil.
Soil's another topic. I'm not going to go there. We're talking about cottage food.
But they were wondering if the meter could be used to test the pH of soil. That's what they want to know. If the cottage
I wouldn't. There are meters specifically made for testing the pH of soil. If you start putting soil in a solution for your meter that you're using for your food, now you're contaminating it with soil. So no. How's that? No, don't use your pH meter that you're using for food production to test soil. How about that for a definitive answer? All right. Federica, do you have any other questions? Or I could launch into the 3 that I got ahead of time and see.
I see there's one from the very beginning from Star, talking about registering your business as an individual, or you have to do it as an individual, not as your business. And she was wondering about what if your business is a sole proprietorship?
Doesn't matter. You cannot register a business. So Star, you have the business Salted Sea. Salted Sea is not the entity that registers. Star Brainerd is the entity that registers. Okay, and then when you're on your label, it has to have your name, not the name of your business. I know this is, people's ears are popping right now, but if you want to stay straight with the cottage food law, that's what's required. Your name, not your business's name. Okay? I'm just the messenger, baby. I'm just trying to help you all get where you want to go.
Cindy,
Okay.
how about you ask some of those questions you got, or answer those
Okay.
questions you got?
So I'm going to go back to my share screen. And we're going to, here we go. Okay. Can cottage foods be sold across state lines? Good question. If the other state allows it, you can. Minnesota and Wisconsin do not. So if you're a cottage food, registered as a cottage food vendor in Minnesota, you cannot sell your cottage food in Wisconsin. If you are a cottage food vendor in Wisconsin, you cannot sell your cottage food made and produced in Wisconsin in Minnesota. However, if you're a Wisconsin resident, you can register by taking the training as a Minnesota cottage food producer and sell baked goods in Minnesota. But you can't sell canned goods or acidified foods that cross state lines. And the reason for that is because once you cross state lines with acidified foods, all of a sudden, woo, 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 federal FDA rules preempt state laws. And I'm sure you don't want me to read the rules out loud, but the basic summary is you can, as a Wisconsin resident, hold a Minnesota cottage food registration and sell baked goods in Minnesota. But as a Wisconsin resident, even if you are holding a Minnesota cottage food registration, you cannot sell canned goods or acidified foods in Minnesota. Wisconsin does not allow their food to be sold outside of the state with their registration. And if you have questions about that, go to the Wisconsin Cottage Food website. Okay, I know that's a bummer for some people. And you know, who knows, in a few years that rule might change, but right now that's where we're sitting on that. Okay, are there county or city rules that prevent cottage food from being sold? Most, if not all, counties in the state of Minnesota have accepted the state law. So as far as I know, I don't know of any counties, but I would double check. But definitely there are some cities, Minneapolis and Rochester and others around the state, who require additional licensing or have local zoning codes that restrict what you can and can't do. So if you live in one of these larger cities, you definitely need to check and find out what kind of additional licensing or zoning restrictions there are. So yeah, that's a bummer for some folks. Even, you know, I know the Minneapolis registration is like $85 a year. So if you're making $5,000 to $18,000 a year selling your cottage food, it's another hoop you have to jump through, but it's not overly onerous. It's probably worth it. So, and you don't want to get a foul of one of these cities because they're way meaner than the MDA. All right.
And Jane just jumped in on the chat and said correct. Actually, no county is allowed to opt out of cottage food law.
All right. Thank you, Jane. I was really glad you were there to answer that. Cool. I got questions about whether or not you can dehydrate and grind grains. So if you want to make corn flour or wild rice flour, can you do that under cottage food? Yay! You can. Yes, yes. You can use a dehydrator in your kitchen to dry herbs. And if they're crinkly dry, you know they're dry, right? So you're under the water activity restriction. Yes, you can grind and mill and package grain products in your kitchen and sell them under the cottage food law. But remember, cottage food only allows you to sell directly to the consumer. So if you want to sell to a restaurant or a school or something like that, all of a sudden you jump into a whole nother category. There's a lot more restrictions. But if you're selling directly to a consumer, you can do those things under the cottage food registration. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and now I'm yours, baby. Tell me what you need to know. Give me questions.
We've got two questions about things that are allowed to be used in cottage foods or not. Can alcohol be used in cottage foods? That's Justin's question.
So alcohol, that's actually a really good question. So you can't do something like a cordial that has like 40% alcohol. You are allowed to make kombucha under cottage food, but you have to make sure that your alcohol content is under 2%. So you have to, kombucha and vinegar making are technically allowed under cottage food, but there's a higher standard. It has to be done in a food safe environment with stainless steel sinks and stainless steel counters, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to do the monitoring, the kombucha, you'd have to monitor the alcohol. So technically, if it's over 2%, no. That's my understanding.
And then how about frostings and icings, such as like a frosted cupcake or ice scone?
Yes, yes. And that's again where I would totally direct you to the Minnesota Farm Markets Association fact sheet. They have a whole section on frostings, confections, candies. So yes, there are lots and lots of icings, fillings, frostings, sugar art, toppings. Yes, you can do those under cottage food, but definitely go and look at, because there are some things like things that are not allowed in the icing are flavored with alcohol with a final content that is greater than 0.5% by volume. So there are some, caveats to that, but that's what's so nice about this particular document. It really does an excellent job of laying out what you can do, what you can't do, and when there are exceptions. And if you don't find what you need in this document, or it's a little fuzzy, for example, the question on grinding corn, I read this and I'm like, I'm still not clear whether I can grind corn as a cottage food vendor. I reached out to somebody who knew more than me and got a confirmation that yes, in fact, you can do that. So if you read something there and it's still fuzzy to you, reach out to somebody, me or one of the other organizers with the Minnesota Farm Market, Jane Jewett, who is an excellent resource with Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Ag, and U of M Extension. So reach out to somebody and get clarification if you need it.
Awesome. We've got a question from Corey about the product of farm exemption. If you could talk more about that.
This is totally different than that. The product of farm exemption is a whole nother webinar. So yes, there is this thing called product of farm where you can sell things off the farm, like your produce and meat and stuff like that, so long as, like, say you want to sell sausage, okay? If you add a tiny pinch of salt, guess what? It's no longer product of farm. You've added a product to it, so then you have to jump into it. So if people want to do a little Zoominar on product of farm, that's a whole nother topic. I'm sorry? I thought I heard somebody. So anyway, product of farm and cottage food are different things. Suffice to say.
This seems like need to add our survey into the chat. A lot of people are saying in the chat that they would be interested in a session on product of farm regulations. So that is something that everyone who's attending here can add into our survey. Share what you're interested in. So here it's linked in the chat, and it'll also be emailed to you as well.
Yeah, so Federica's, like you said, one of the parts, we definitely want your feedback on how this Zoominar helped you, didn't help you, what we did great, what we should never do again, and then ideas for future Zoominars that you would find valuable. So definitely give us your feedback. If you want it, we'll do our best to make it happen.
There's one question that might have been lost. It says, wild mushrooms, can you use wild mushrooms?
Wild mushrooms, no, unless you hold the certification. So to be a wild harvester of mushrooms, you need to have a certification training that supposedly guarantees that you know how to properly identify that wild mushroom. So if it's truly a wild mushroom, You need to have that certification. If you do, then you could potentially use it in your cottage food. But here's where things get wacky with mushrooms. If you cultivate the mushroom, you can use it in your cottage food. Okay, so wild harvesting is different than cultivating. Yeah, we could do a whole session on mushrooms too, because it's kind of a wacky, wild topic. Okay. I can't, so Federica, David, anybody more questions? I know there's.
Here's one you probably know very clearly. Is all the money made from cottage food to be claimed when you file your taxes?
Duh, yeah, it's income. Sorry. But for the most part, and this may be different in certain municipalities, because it is a food product, it's not taxable. So you don't have to collect and pay sales tax. For some municipalities or jurisdictions, there might be some variability on that, but in terms of income reported to the IRS, yes, definitely you need to report this as self-employment income.
I guess I would add that, remember to take away your expenses as a...
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So as a sole proprietor even, so you say you bought a bunch of sugar and you raised a bunch of fruit and then you bought jars and you're deducting your expenses. So say you sold $10,000 worth of cottage food product. Well, from that $10,000, you document and deduct your expenses related to producing that product, and that's your net. So you do have to report your gross income, but on self-employment, on your Schedule C for self-employment, or if you do a Schedule F for farm, you deduct all of those expenses, and then you end up with a net income. And that is often much, much lower than your gross income. So thank you, David, for pointing that out. Yes.
This is Jane Jewett. I want to weigh in on the tax question too.
Oh, yes, thank you.
There is a weird little detail in Minnesota state tax law that catches up cottage food producers, and that is that if you both make and sell a product with multiple ingredients in it, a food product, that is taxable. And that does not catch up grocery stores because they are not making the jams and jellies and salsas and pickles on their shelves. So they don't charge sales tax on it. But for cottage food producers, you are making and selling the product. Anything with flour in it is exempt, but jams, jellies, pickles, salsa, horseradish, those are multi-ingredient products that the cottage food producer is both making and selling, and they are subject to sales tax. And it's
okay.
It's really ludicrous.
Yeah. Okay, so Jane, I'll follow up with you and try to get, a more kind of comprehensive statement on that. And folks, I will post that with this so you can, or just so you know that what you do need to do. So apparently baked goods not, but canned goods you do have to charge and pay and report Minnesota sales tax. And most municipalities also have sales tax. So there's the state sales tax, there might be a city sales tax, there might be a local township or county sales tax, depending on where you're at. That could be a whole nother Zoominar if people want it. Okay, other questions?
One question from Jan just came in about recommendations for the best way to record our sales.
The best way to record your sales is using, I mean, what I do at a farmer's market, you can do it in whatever way is accurate and archivable. So you can write it down on a sales slip every time you sell something. What I tend to do, because farm markets tend to be pretty busy, is I have a list of what product I brought to the market, and then at the end of the market, I do my end of the market inventory, and then I know what I sold. So, but you do need to just record it in some way or fashion, and so you have those records, and so you know. And especially for cash sales. I do a lot of things on Square, and the nice thing about that is Square will collect sales tax, and it records all my transactions, so I know exactly what I sold. But for cash sales, you do need to record them in some way, shape, or form.
And another question about separate body of laws for church groups or groups baking and selling to individuals.
That is a whole different category. So churches are not individuals. They do not fall under the cottage food registration, and they therefore aren't selling under that program. There's a whole body of exceptions and whatever for charities, places of worship, all that. That's a whole nother topic, but they are not under cottage food.
How about the online cottage food producers registration form on the MDA site? Does that take place in paper form or online?
So the tier 1, you can download it. There is a place, because there are a lot of like Amish people or people who don't have access to technology, where it's actually an obstacle to get that form. So you can write there's an address, somebody will have to get the address. I'll try to find that address. You can write to the Minnesota Department of Ag and request paper versions that then you can submit that way. So yes, there is a paper version if you need it.
I'll request that.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a really good question. I'll make a note of that and try to add that to this so that people know what address they need to write to request paper applications. Excellent question.
Awesome. So that'll be in the chat, or we'll send that out in a follow-up. We're slingshotting all over the place.
Okay.
But we were talking about wild mushrooms before, and some folks are wondering if that applies to all foraged plants.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. So that's another really good question. Yeah.
This is Jane. You do not need certified identification training to wild harvest things other than mushrooms.
Okay. There you go. From the expert, Jane. So for plants, you do not need a certification.
Yep, so you can wild harvest nettles, you can wild harvest, choke cherries or any of that kind of thing. Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, mushrooms are the bugaboo.
Well, thanks for people who resubmitted their questions to make sure it got into my list, but it looks like our questions have slowed down with perfect timing to finish out the Zoom in our Cindy.
All right. If there's anybody who has a question that we haven't answered, go ahead and unmute yourself and just shout it out. We've got 4 or 5 minutes here. If there's a question that we haven't answered, let me know. Otherwise, yeah, I'll hang out here waiting for questions. And
well, thanks everyone for joining, and look for additional episodes and subject matter to be covered. And let us know what you want covered, and we'll try and put it together.
Yep, we're here to try to make your lives easier and better. So, yee.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you able to give out samples?
Yes, you can. as a cottage food vendor, you can sample at a farmer's market. And luckily, there has been some clarification on this as recently as 2014. In order to do sampling, you needed to have a retail food handler's license. That is not the case anymore. So as a cottage food vendor, you can offer free samples of your product at a farmer's market or an event that you're selling. Obviously, you need to use good sanitary hygiene, blah, blah, blah. But yes, you can do that.
But I
Excellent
believe
question.
right now with COVID,
Oh,
I believe
you're
there's
right.
no free sampling.
Right. Thank you, David. Yeah, right now, under COVID, there's no sampling or any consumables at farm markets of any kind. And we don't know when that's going to end. It's a revolving, the Minnesota Farm Market Association and others are having weekly Zoominars, kind of updating market managers on what is going on, how these rules are changing. So thanks, David, for mentioning that. So in the big picture, you're allowed, but right now, because of COVID, nobody's allowed to sample anything, period, end of discussion.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
And in the chat, just to add a little bit of extra information, Jane shares that the sample size is 3 ounces or less, and samples have to be individually packaged, perhaps.
So Jane, when you say individually packaged, what does that mean? So somebody's selling jelly.
No, I didn't say that. Someone said they thought that it had to be individually packaged and sample sizes. It does not.
No.
Be individually packaged, but you do have to be in control of your samples. You can't let people self-serve.
Right. So for example, if you're selling pickles, you can't just put a jar of pickles out there and let people stick their fingers in the jar and yada yada. That's just gross and disgusting. You need to give them a clean single serve sample that you're in control of. Yeah, so hopefully that's obvious, but sometimes it's not, you know. But again, right now, because of COVID, no sampling. Well, I'm certainly willing to stay on and answer any more questions if anybody has a few more questions in the next few minutes, but it's 11 o'clock. I really thank everybody for coming. This is really great. I'm really glad we had such a great attendance. And like Federica said, it's Federica, no R, no Fred, Federica. She's definitely fill out that survey and give us your feedback because we really value it a lot. All right. If anybody has a question now, you could unmute your microphone and ask. Otherwise, if I don't hear any questions in the next minute or so, then we'll probably just say adios.
How about just remember to go to the Finland Food Chain Facebook page and like it. You'll see the video posted there, and you'll get notifications about upcoming classes and events as well. Yes,
yes, thank you, Kari. Yeah, so the Finland Food Chain Facebook page, like it, follow it. There's always good information that we're posting there, not just Zoominars, but other resources for growers. So it's a great place to be. Yep. All right. Anybody else?
Hi, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And let me put my email up once again here. I was going to do that. Where am I? There's my email. If anybody has questions, feel free to direct. Well, no, I got to share that, don't I? Duh. Share screen. Share screen. There we go. Can you see it, folks? There's my email, presenter Cindy Hale at friendsoffinland.org. If you have any questions or want to do some follow-up conversations, definitely reach out. Are we done?
I think so.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Get out in this beautiful sun, social distance, and we'll talk to you all again soon.